Good. That's it. Is that going to be long enough? No, probably not. Probably not. That's all right. There we go. Hug in the shade here.
No.
Yeah, that's right.
In the shop? Is that better or? So,
It's not over
sorry.
anyway.
Are you good?
Thank you.
Alright, I might place to drive.
So, let's swap these out.
Yeah, I think Georgia County's on peak. On holidays or
All right. Thumbs up there. Thumbs up. Yeah, good to go. Okay. Look, e-scooters have been on our roads now for a couple of years. They're new technology, but we've got to make sure that they're safe technology. As people would know, as the Minister for Transport Main Roads, road safety has been one of my highest priorities since I took on the job. And what we want to see is people adopting new technologies that have benefits, but we want to see them do it in a way that's safe, not just for them as the users of that, but also for other users of our transport network as well. And so we've been working over the last 12 months with stakeholders from all different sectors. So whether it's been RACQ, cyclist groups, e-scooter groups, people work in the health sector and the emergency departments, Queensland Police, we've been working on a range of regulations for e-scooters that get the balance right to make them safer for everybody who uses our roads. And today we announced that from November the 1st we'll see a range of new measures come into place. One of the biggest conflicts is pedestrians feeling unsafe on footpaths with e-scooters zipping by, often at high speeds. So what we're doing today is we're bringing in from November the 1st a 12 km/h speed limit on footpaths for e-scooters so that we can get the safety in mind so that pedestrians don't feel threatened by e-scooters going by at high speeds. But we still want e-scooters, of course, on those commuter runs so they can do up to 25 km/h. That's fine. We think that's a reasonable level given the technology that we're talking about. There is limited manoeuvrability on e-scooters, so that's why we have the 25 km/h speed limit. This is a national standard. It's pretty usual right across jurisdictions. But we also want to see things like bells on e-scooters as well. Just like a cyclist, you need to let people know when you're coming sometimes, especially if the pathway's blocked. This is a simple, straightforward measure that everybody should be have on their e-scooter to let people know they're coming through. Helmets, absolutely essential. Let's be really clear, we've had deaths from e-scooters, and not wearing a helmet is one of the biggest issues. If you're wearing an e-scooter, you do not want your head to be hitting a car, the bitumen, a hard object at speed. It can kill you, it can cause lifelong brain injuries. That's not what we want to see. So helmets every single time you wear an e-scooter are absolutely essential. I know some people have qualms about that, but there's nothing more important than your health and safety, and you can end up being affected very badly in these crashes and sometimes in a really profound way. So that's what we want to see. I want to also thank all the e-scooter riders out there who are doing the right thing. You know, I think the majority of e-scooter riders are safe, who go about things well. We're talking about a minority here who haven't got the balance right, and that's what these regulations are geared towards. So we're also allowing e-scooters to use on-road bike lanes from 50 km/h or less, and also where there's full separation of bikeways from vehicles. So that's important for us. If you've got a 60 km/h speed limit versus a 25 km/h speed limit, there's too big a differential there. So that's why we've brought in the 50k limit. And of course, currently you can use an e-scooter on a local road where there's no line marking safely. That continues. So the majority of our roads, of course, in Queensland are local government roads in that kind of category. So you're still able to use those. I want to thank all the local governments who have been working with us on parking provisions. We'll have that ready by early next year. A little bit more work to do, but one of the things that I'm committed to doing as the Minister is to make sure that the franchise e-scooters that often block paths of people who've got mobility issues, that everybody knows where to put them, to keep them out of the way of people in wheelchairs, people who might have might be senior citizens, might have different kinds of difficulties getting around. If you can't get through, it blocks your human right to simply get to the services that you need. And that happens too often. And thoughtless, sometimes very thoughtless behaviour from people, just leave it in people's way, really unsafe. We've got to make sure that if you use an e-scooter, leave it somewhere safe, leave it out of the way of people. Think about people who've got vision impairments, for instance, of what that means for them. We've got to make sure that we get that right as well. We'll see an education campaign ramping up to November the 1st, so I urge people to pay attention to that, look at how it applies to them. But I think as we see these measures come into place, if they're as successful as we believe they will be, I think we'll see other jurisdictions in other states and territories adopt them as well. So we want this to be the template for getting the balance right, making e-scooters safe and other mobility personal devices as well, but also making sure that people who like them and use them, who benefit from them, can still use them in a reasonable way.
Minister, does the 12 km/h speed limit apply to shared paths like this one behind you?
It applies to footpaths and to some shared paths. Some shared paths are quite low speed environments, other are higher speed environments. So we'll have local governments and state governments signing those paths that are not 12 to 25 km/h. You might just wait till the train goes by. There we go. Now we've got planes, we've got all forms of transport going by. It will apply to some shared paths, but where there's ability for them to be 25 km/h, they'll need to be signed. So local governments are working on that, so is the state government, depending on who owns the shared pathway. Clearly for those commuter shared pathways like the Bicentennial Bikeway, the Veloway, Ipswich Motorway, Gateway Arterial, for those commuter style paths, of course it would be 25 km/h there because you're more akin to a cyclist and a cyclist speed. But where, say, you get much more constrained environments where you've got limited visibility, more pedestrians, the speed there might come down to 12. So we want to keep things reasonable there, but we don't want to stop people using e-scooters for commuting. Every person who uses an e-scooter for commuting isn't driving a car. That's a good thing.
12 km/h isn't really that fast. I mean, people run faster than that. They certainly cycle faster than that. How did you arrive at that particular figure? And do you think that risks perhaps forcing people not to use scooters as a form of commuting?
You'd have to be a pretty fast runner to be running regularly at 12k. Most people walk around at about between 3 and 5 km/h. So we're still allowing you to do a little bit more than double that speed on a footpath. In the same way that cyclists can safely use a footpath as well. But we think that's a reasonable limit. I'm a runner, so I know the different kinds of speeds. 12 km/h, you'd have to be pretty high athletic kind of person to be able to maintain that kind of a speed. But we think this is the right limit, and we ask people to respect it and do the right thing.
So how are you going to be policing this, and what does that mean for police resources? Are they going to be camping out with radar guns in bushes along the Southway?
Look, I've already seen police doing enforcement blitzes on this, and they will continue to do that under the new regulations. So I'm a regular user of shared paths and bike paths, both on a bike and as a runner. I've seen more than once police out enforcing the provisions, educating people, and the biggest thing two things. The biggest thing I see out there, like to see the speeds come down. In many cases, you see people zip by at crazy speeds, and if they hit somebody, it's going to be very bad news for both of them. but also the helmet use has to improve on e-scooters. You just do not want your head to be hitting something. It is a very fragile part of your body ultimately, and speed and a crash means bad news for you if you're not wearing a helmet.
You've already got penalties in place. How many of those have been handed out, especially for speeding? Do you know?
Look, I'd have to get you those specific stats, but we certainly have enforcement blitzes by Queensland Police. I thank them for that. I see Queensland Police, for instance, not only doing enforcement blitzes, I've seen them on bicycles, on bike paths, doing patrols. I think that's a good thing to see, including at night time. So I thank the police for their presence on our active transport infrastructure. We'll see that continue. Obviously people need to be mindful that at some point, if they're doing the wrong thing, they will get caught. And we've brought in these fines. Look, there's some pretty hefty fines in there. So if you were using a mobile phone while you're using an e-scooter, you'll get the same $1,000 fine as a motorist or a cyclist. If you're riding an e-scooter and you're trying to use your mobile phone, you really need to take a good look at yourself. You're a danger to yourself, you're a danger to everybody else. And we've also brought in graduated speeding fines here. So if you're a bit over the limit, say 5 or 10, you'll get the standard $140 fine. But if you're one of these cowboys that are doing 30 or 40k over the speed limit, we'll really throw the book at you with $578. So I think that's reasonable. It's the same principle as if you drive a car or if you ride a motorbike, drive a truck, same kind of thing. So let's be safe every time we move about.
You flagged further reforms around drunk and drug riding. What type of measures are you looking at in respect to that?
Yeah, look, those provisions are a little more complex. We're working closely with Queensland Police, Department of Attorney General and Justice. We've got to get the balance right on that, but we don't want to see people riding drunk on e-scooters. It's a terrible recipe in terms of injuries, and we see that in emergency departments. So we will be making some changes around that. And I just say to people, if you don't think you're sober enough to drive a car, then you're not sober enough to ride an e-scooter either. So stay away from it. Make safety your first priority.
Are you looking at making it similar to a car driver if you caught, over 0.05 for an e-scooter user?
Yeah, look, we're looking at this in detail. There's a range of issues around definitions and categorisation, so we just want to make sure we get the balance right there. If you're riding it and where you're riding, whether it's on the road or whether you're on the footpath. So we'll have more on that early next year. But clearly, if you're over the limit, you shouldn't be riding a bicycle, driving a car, using an e-scooter. You should be getting an Uber or a taxi and taking it easy.
Are you considering registration, given you are treating riders more like drivers?
Yeah, no, we're not considering registration. Look, most e-scooter riders, like cyclists, also own cars. They already contribute to the provision of our road infrastructure. And let's face it, e-scooters and cyclists don't really do much damage to bitumen roads. Cars and trucks do, and most people already make those contributions right now.
Realistically, do you expect most of these penalties to work, given that there is no registration? Speeding generally for a lot of vehicles is caught because of their registration. How do you expect to catch people speeding if they, can just spoon off past or?
Yeah, well, the police will be out there with their radar guns. I've seen them before, and they'll do it again. And where we know there's hot spots of people doing the wrong thing, they'll be out there issuing fines, and the fines are going to hurt, right? And they're designed to. But moving about, you've got to make safety your first priority, and we make no apology for giving you a hefty fine if you're really doing the wrong thing, because you're endangering other people's lives. If you're going, 20 kilometres over the legal limit at 46 kilometres an hour on an e-scooter, and you hit a person, it's going to be very, very bad news for both of you. So we'll throw at the book at you if you do the wrong thing. We love it when people do the right thing, and look, majority of people do, but we've got to educate that minority who aren't.
If a cyclist is travelling on a footpath more than 12 kilometres per hour, will they get fined?
Cyclists are allowed on footpaths as long as they're riding safely. That's been trained for more than 30 years here in Queensland. It's a reasonable provision. They should be riding safely. So
but there's no speed limit?
There's no actual speed limit that applies to a bicycle on a footpath.
So why is this
but they are required to ride safely and respectfully of other people. And there have been people who have been fined for riding unsafely on a footpath in the past.
Why scooters sort of treated differently from cyclists?
Well, scooters are a lot less manoeuvrable than a bicycle. So your ability to respond quickly is much better on a bicycle. You get a higher centre of gravity, you've got much greater stability. They are basically a more manoeuvrable technology. E-scooters, you've got a lot less options, especially when you're braking hard. So they are different technologies. While they might have two wheels and, you know, look at a similar kind of scale, your ability to respond on an e-scooter is much less limited, so that's why it's a little tougher on the e-scooters.
Most private e-scooters have some sort of speedometer that has to get their scooters fitted out as a result of the station.
Look, I don't think so. Look, most people will look at these speeds and pretty much know what that looks like. So whether people have speedometers or not, I think doing the right thing and making sure you're seen to be doing the right thing isn't too much to ask. Most people know what looks like speeding and what doesn't, and you know, I think the police enforce it in a sensible way. There's always a little bit of buffer there that they very rarely, I believe, give out tickets if you're 1 kilometre over a speed limit. I think they're pretty reasonable about how they apply it.
Will there be any grace period when the changes come into effect?
No, they come in from November the 1st, so I encourage people to look at these new provisions from today and start applying them as soon as they can, because they're really about people's safety, and the sooner you apply it, the less likely you are of doing the wrong thing and getting caught. And you know, I think safety is paramount, and it's been regrettable to see, and really tragic to see, a couple of people die recently in e-scooter crashes. I think that's really reminded people how vulnerable you can be. There's great advantages to riding an e-scooter, and lots of people enjoy it and really love it. But there's a risk, and you've got to minimise that risk. And what these regulations are about is minimising the risk for e-scooter riders, but also minimising the risk for the people who use that space that they share with.
What about electric skateboards or hoverboards? I mean, where do we cross the line into scooter territory?
Yeah, so these regulations actually apply to personal mobility devices, so it actually covers electric skateboards and those other kinds of technology, and so they have to comply with these as well. Probably the one area that you can't do is a bell, because they don't have a handlebar, so they'll need to be safe in terms of those sort of circumstances, but they are captured by this. But look, let's face it, 98% of this really applies to e-scooters. When I go around on my bike, I see a lot of e-scooters. I see the very occasional e-skateboard and the very occasional electric single wheel, but they make up a very small number of people actually out there.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask about the dams.
Yeah, that's all I was going to ask as well. How many
Sure.
people are you expecting to take up the offer to use that excess water that's been released from that?
Oh, look, I think we'll see a lot of people take up that offer. Obviously, we're being very cautious with another higher than usual rainfall predicted with another La Nina summer. We're taking a precautionary measure in terms of increasing our flood capacity in Wivenhoe Dam. And obviously, if we're releasing that water over the next 2 weeks, that's a great opportunity for people to enjoy it, use it, and to get a cost of living sort of a bit of assistance. So I encourage people, get into it. For the next 2 weeks, whether you're washing your car, washing your dog, whatever you want to do, this is a good time to do it. But you know, I think people understand that we want to minimise the risk coming into summer. We've already seen some of the difficulties in southern states in the last few days. It's been very hard to watch. It really brings back some pretty bad memories here in March, and we're hoping it's a better summer for us than last summer, but we want to be prepared as we can to minimise the risk for people.
Is it really the right move to release so much, given that we might need that water for drinking in the next couple of months?
Well, look, there's always a judgment call that you've got to make, but the advice that we've got from SecWater, from the Bureau of Meteorology, the Departments of Environment and Science, as well as Water, have been that there is a higher risk this summer in terms of rainfall and consequent, whether there might be an extreme weather event. I think this is a sensible action based on that expert advice from multiple agencies, and I think people would expect that we should make decisions that got people's safety and protection of their property in mind. this area, we had a lot of people affected right throughout Chelmer, Graceville, Sherwood, Yurong-Pili, all the way to the border. Particularly in Brisbane, in terms of Ivanhoe, I think people think that support this measure, and we're still allowing enough in there, obviously, for drinking water purposes going forward.
Is this a decision that should have been taken this time last year, and has a more cautious approach being taken this time around?
Look, I don't think so, no. Last year what we saw was the dams were actually got at a relatively low level going into summer last year. I think they were in the 50s, so there was actually a lot of flood storage compartment, and we had the most rainfall in a 3-day period since records began. It was a highly unpredicted weather event, but the dam did its job. It was run as per the manual. That's what we need to do operationally if there is an extreme weather event happening. But of course, when we get expert advice leading into a higher than average rainfall summer, then we should act to protect people and their property.
What's your message to residents this weekend? Is it too early to start preparing?
Sorry, last bit?
Is it too early to start preparing for the rains?
Oh, it's never too early to start preparing. I think people need to be mindful that there is a heightened risk this summer. I think most people are pretty tuned into that already, to be frank. I think people know La Nina is still here for summer. People have seen the terrible pictures from Tasmania and from Victoria in the last 3 or 4 days. I think people are very aware, and I'm sure people are preparing very well. And if they're not, I'd certainly encourage them to do so, because we're hoping it's a better summer for us all, but we've got to also be prepared for the worst. All of our emergency and first responder agencies are fully preparing for the worst, just in case, and they'll be there to help the community if indeed we end up with another event. All good?
Thank you.
All right, lovely. Thanks, everybody.
Much on for the rest of today?
Yeah, a couple of community events, and through the family thing tonight, and yeah.
Always good.
Yeah, it is, mate. Yeah, no. Fortunately, I had last weekend off, which was good.
Oh, yeah.
But,